So first, we're gonna just talk about what stress eating means. So stress eating is defined as eating as a response to stress, boredom, unhappiness, or other emotional conditions rather than a response to physical hunger. This can cause people to overeat, choose less nutritious foods, and then ignore their hunger and satiety cues. And as you probably know, overeating can lead to long-term health consequences like obesity, hypertension, and diabetes. And according to the American Psychological Association, 38% of adults admit to overeating or eating unhealthy foods when they're stressed. So, when people and animals are feeling stressed, they tend to eat high fat or sugar containing foods because they're more pleasurable and more palatable. And in a study in a study of rats that they were introduced to more and more stress, they chose high fatty foods and sugary foods over the nutritious foods. And their eating patterns became more erratic and they didn't take into account hunger levels or the need for caloric intake. And this kind of showed that stress can cause irregular eating patterns and lead to more overeating. And these effects are even greater in patients who are already overweight or obese. And so, some of the physiological reasons that we stress eat is because stress causes our body to release cortisol, and increased cortisol can cause hunger, which will cause us to increase caloric intake. And the way that these really enjoyable foods activate our brain's reward system is similar to the way that opioids, dopamine, and cannabinoids um, trigger in our brain. And this repeated stimulation can lead us to be more compulsive about overeating and increasing the drive to initiate eating. And then here's just a little graphic about what causes emotional eating and kind of the cycle of how when you get upset, then you'll have the urge to eat and you eat more than you know you should, which causes guilt, which then leads to more emotions and can keep this cycle going.
All right, so now let's switch gears and talk about the stress eating and COVID-19 pandemic. So, according to the Blue Cross Blue Shield, 47% of adults noticed that they were eating more during the pandemic. And this increase was due to a combination of everyday stressors and overall the uncertainty the pandemic brought. So, what were some of these uncertainties? Well, there are a number of reasons why COVID-19 made people stressed, of course. To list a few, there was uncertainty of future COVID variants, if they were going to be more deadly or not, financial concerns, safety of friends and loved ones during the pandemic, prolongation of isolation, further changes in daily routines, and oneself own well-being when interacting with others. And this list is inexhaustible and it can be highly personal to the individual. And how does this exactly apply to college students? Very clearly, everyone was affected by the pandemic, but specifically the college students, we had a bit of a more unique situation. In the summer of 2020, a study done in Worcester State University surveyed a total of 575 students to understand how the pandemic and social distancing affected them. And it turned out that 36% of students noticed that they were overeating, and 34% noticed that they were gaining a significant amount of weight during the pandemic. And 82% of those students said that they gained weight Well, their weight gain was attributed to their increase in consumption. And when asked why exactly they were eating more, they cited that it was basically due to emotions. So the phenomenon of feelings of uncertainty, anxiety, and stress while at home and while taking online classes.
So next we're going to talk about some ways to combat stress eating. So intuitive eating is one of the ways that you can combat stress eating. It was developed in 1995 by two registered dietitians, and the premise of intuitive eating rejects diets, discourages labeling food as bad, encourages honoring hunger and satiety cues, and encourages choosing foods that make you feel good and help your body function its best. And intuitive eating has been associated with lower BMI, decreased emotional eating, higher levels of everyday mindfulness, and a positive influence on people's relationship with food and eating behaviors. So, for how to eat intuitively, the main goal is to recognize what is physical hunger and what is emotional hunger. So, physical hunger is the biological urge for nutrients, which will start out gradually. Your stomach can growl, you'll start to feel fatigued and irritable, and after consuming food, you'll feel satiated. Whereas emotional hunger is driven by negative emotions and can cause cravings for food based off those certain emotions. And this eating can often lead to guilt and self-hatred. And it's also a few tips is to remember that one meal or snack isn't going to break you. And it's important to listen and take notice of the signals for comfortable fullness, which means you feel full but don't feel uncomfortable, feel like you have a distended stomach or feeling any pain, and your stomach should feel neutral, so not feeling super hungry still, but not feeling overfull. And these different methods are to make eating more enjoyable, respect your body, and it can also be helpful to keep a food diary.
So, what goes into keeping a food diary? So you can use any kind of journal, it's so long as it's blank journal, or you can use a specific template. But all in all, it's a tool that would be used to record your everyday appetite and gut hormone responses. So for instance, you would write down when you notice you get hungry, if there were any triggers that caused you to seek out food, and if you felt satiated after meals. And all of this is done so that when you look back, you can find patterns in your eating habits. And maybe there is a time of day that you get particularly hungry and you decide then to indulge. So, in fact, it was stated by Mayo Clinic that many people find that the afternoon or evening may be high risk, maybe a high risk period for those that stress eat. And so it's very important to know when and what causes your body to seek out food so that you can find solutions to combat your stress eating. And so here is an example of a sample food diary. So you can see the time that was recorded, when you got hungry, the place where you were hungry. Maybe you tend to get hungry when you're with other people or you're alone. It has a section for what kind of activity you were doing. So you can see driving, cooking, talking. For students, it'd probably be like studying, and then there is what mood you were in, if you felt rushed, stressed, and so on and so forth. But one of the things that you should notice is that, at least in this template, there is no calorie counting. So, why do we not encourage calorie counting? It actually can be more bad than good. So, counting calories may be effective in losing weight, but only in the short term. 2/3 of people using calorie counting for weight loss actually gained back the weight they lost. And this could be due to a number of things, but overall, these types of programs are not sustainable. One reason may be because calorie counting takes the pleasure out of eating, and the majority of people found it hard to actually maintain. And these kinds of programs have been shown to cause more psychological stress in individuals as it requires a constant tallying of numbers and weighing food options. A study observing weight loss strategies and stress in women found that calorie counting or restriction regimens caused an increase of perceived stress and increase the women's cortisol levels. And another reason why calorie counting is ineffective is that it really does encourage people to make unhealthy food choices. It's important to understand that not all calories are the same, and a low calorie diet does not equal a healthy one. We can kind of think of the Twinkie diet, where not necessarily you're not eating anything good, you're eating a Twinkie. But some individuals may decide to eat non-nutritious foods in small quantities to meet their calorie requirements and avoid healthier options. And in intuitive eating, it's we want you more to think of what you're eating and think positively of it and its positive impact on your body. So another great strategy that can be used to combat stress eating is simply keeping snacks out of sight. Having visible food in places that you frequent can increase the likelihood of stress eating. Visual exposure to food can stimulate the striatum of the brain and cause a rise in cravings and overindulging. So, to prevent this, make sure snacks or any kind of food are a little bit more inaccessible and take them out of your line of sight. This will help to curb any temptation and possibly find other healthier ways to cope with your stress. And the last strategy that we would like to touch upon is the mindfulness-based stress reduction program. So this is an 8-week long course consisting of 2.5 to 3 hour class per week and one 7-hour silent retreat between weeks 6 and 7. The program teaches people mindfulness practices and requires programmees to do a 45-minute formal mindfulness practice every day for 6 days per week, and any other informal mindfulness practices in the interim. It was found to significantly decrease the internal disinhibition scale, or the IDS score, which is a scale and a scoring system that predicts weight loss in those that eat in response to internal cues like emotions. Those with higher IDS scores were predicted to experience less weight loss during the program and more weight gain after complications. And there was a correlation between baseline scores and changes in stress eating after programs. They found that people who struggled more based on their baseline IDS scores had the greater change in their stress eating habits after completing the program. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Here is our works cited question.